Okay, this is part 2 of this demonstration on basic geometric forms. So just continuing the shading. I've got a paper towel here so that I'm not smudging my work, and my various graphite pencils and erasers. So I was just at the point when I was adding a little bit of shading to the area around and underneath my rectangular prism here. So adding a little bit of darker shading right underneath it. A little bit around it. So keeping my marks small and controlled, making sure that they come right up to these edges so that we don't have the outline sticking out too much. If you want to do a little bit of shading back here too, you can. It's not necessarily as imperative since you have the shading on here to create the contrast. And I will continue with shading up into this negative space here above the table. So all of this will get blended out. And remember, a lot of that is not with a paper towel or your finger or any kind of blending tool. A lot of that blending really happens with the pencil, and I've also been using my graphite stick, and you kind of have to overlap them to get that to smoothly look like it's blending. Okay. All right. So the one other area that I haven't added any shading, I'm going to add a little bit of shading here along this edge. So again, just so that we don't have these really exaggerated sense of outlines, that we can really have more of this just kind of shown with the edge of one part of the form, one plane against another. So depending on the lighting situation, you might see this in different ways, but I'm going to say the light is hitting the top of my box here, and that maybe we'll just have a little bit of shadow here, where maybe that's hanging over. All right, and then so I kept all my marks really small, but I can also continue with my blending, and if this has a little bit of graphite on it already, I can also use that to even add a little bit of light shading. So, but I still want to keep these edges really nice and crisp, so I'm not typically going to go over any of these edges. I'm just going to stay on one side of any of my edges. So just turning this around as needed to get to what I want to do. So, and if I do accidentally go over an edge, I can go back in with my pencil and my eraser to clean that up. All right, so on these edges of the shadows, you want to make sure that you don't have an outline on it. So I was seeing a little bit of an outline there, so I'm making sure to erase that. Sometimes I'll actually draw an outline and then erase it so that I can just sort of know where it is or barely see it as I'm adding my shading to help create that soft edge. And on these shadows, that would be the exception to the rule of not going over edges. If I want to create a soft edge, then I will purposely go over those edges to make that soft. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Again, if I want to add a little bit of shading back here, I could do that. So again, but I just need to make sure that I maintain some contrast with the shapes around it. Okay, now we are going to shade the cylinder. So I have this example for you to look at. We are going to be having our light coming from this side, just like it is here. Notice though that there's a little bit of that shadow, then it goes to the highlight through the midtones, and it actually has the darkest part not right at the edge, but here. And then it gets just a little bit lighter again, and then you would have the cast shadow. So this reflected light is often what that's called, and that might go back to a midtone. Okay, so I am now shading my cylinder. I've started right at this edge, and I'm just shading to the side lightly. I can also go in and use my eraser to clean up that line. So I go back and forth. So a lot of times your outline maybe has become a little bit thicker as you were trying to figure out exactly where it would be. So you, at this point, are just making sure that it is just normal outline, and your shading is starting right next to that. I also am shading up here at the top and out, again to create that contrast. And then here and out here, I can just use gradations to make that kind of naturally transition. All right, so we also know that we're going to have shadow on this side. So again, I'm starting at this edge. And notice I change directions when I get to this edge down here, so I'm creating this buffer zone. And after I've created this buffer zone on this side, so that vertical line, I actually do want to create marks that go this direction. So by having our marks follow the form, that's going to reinforce that sense of form. So I can have them go up and down, but I can also have them go this way to make this feel like it's very round, it's very volumetric. So I'm letting this go from this light gray to white, and then I'm going to start in the mid-tone. And here I can shade a little bit along the top, again, just to create that little bit of contrast there. And by using these side-to-side, slightly curving marks, this will also help me make sure that this edge of where the shading, the shadow, is starting again, isn't a hard edge. So down here at the bottom of the cylinder, I want to keep that a hard edge, starting right where I started that line. But here with the shadow, it's not so definite. So as I move then across, I know I want to make the darkest part of my shadow right here. So I can go in with my ebony pencil or the slightly darker pencil of your choice and add this area of shading. And so I'm going vertically. I can then change and go over side to side. My side to side, though, is going to follow that idea of a curve. So following basically this curve or this curve. All right, so then I can just transition back and forth. And notice, I don't have that smooth gradation right away, so I'm definitely just working at it until I see what I want to see, trying different pencils. I change the direction of my marks, but they're always going with the direction of the form. So they're going with this curve side to side, or they're going up and down like the sides of the form. And if there's somewhere here, let's say I think I want maybe a little too dark, I can just go back in with the eraser and keep going. Here, I need to create more of that curving feel to this. Okay. Now at a certain point, I'll be ready to use my blending tool. Now this one's a little bit dirty, so I want to be careful. I'm going to use this in maybe the darker area. And one of the things you're going to see that happens, especially if my blending tool is dirty, it kind of drags extra pigment across. So you need to be careful with that. So I might refold a blending tool to get it back to light. Notice how I'm being careful with this. I'm looking as I go. Now see how that's kind of closing in there? So you want to watch out for that. So ideally you don't have that happening, but if it is happening, that's when you're getting out your eraser and you're going to use your eraser as a drawing tool. So sometimes I'm just erasing, created just a line, but then I'm going to go back and I'm essentially hatching or stippling with that eraser to get this to blend. So I can create these hatch marks even in white. So see how all of these curving hatch marks, again, these are going to reinforce that curving form that I want. And I can keep working back and forth. To get this looking really good. So changing back and forth between eraser and pencil. Switching pencils, so you want to have all of your different graphite pencils out. So one of the areas where I also need to add to this I need to add this shadow. So this one goes back at a bit of an angle. I think when we were doing our box, we just kind of did it more to the side. So to keep that consistent, I'm going to have it not angle back like that, but just come to the side. So again, I would have that just come to the side. And you're going to have a shape kind of like this, almost like a ghost shape, think of that. All right, but we don't want that outline to show. So after I do that outline, I might erase it so that you can see it, but only if you're looking really, really closely, you, the person who's doing the shading, but the viewer won't really be able to see that. And then I'm going to shade horizontally. And you can also, if you'd like, you could try using some of this dirty part of the blending tool. Now I want to be careful. You don't want to go over this edge. So here I'm probably going to be a lot more careful. Go with the direction of this edge. So making sure my shading comes right up to that edge. But I want to be really careful there. Also, if this is kind of starting to weaken, it's getting too light, I can take a piece of scrap paper, so this is just a photocopy that I don't need. So if I want to use that blending tool to add shadow, it needs to be a little darker, I just darkened it up. And anytime I need to recharge it, I just come back over here to recharge. Right, but I'm still going primarily side to side. All right, and so notice here how I'm then coming back to this edge and making sure that's nice and crisp. All right, and you want to, anytime you're working on this too, you want to make sure that you're keeping it symmetrical, that it's still lining up there. All right, and I would say I could probably give a little bit of shading to the top of this. So just using this a little bit. And I'm being very careful, you may not be able to see it in the video, but I'm not crossing the edges. So I might have a little bit of a lighter value out here around those edges. So I think you can see that in the video where it's like a light gray and then goes to white. But yeah, but it works. All right, let's see. Other thing I can do is also add to this. So I might turn this around if I need to. So again, I want to make sure I don't go over these edges. I want those crisp edges where I want them. But this is what I was talking about, where I want to create this gradation. All right, so I can shade in the negative space where it helps me, but we need to make sure that I'm just, I'm not necessarily going to shade everywhere. So you're going to have to use gradations as needed. Okay, so now I'm coming to this cone. Same thing with this cone as with the cylinder, basically. So over here is going to be my light to mid gray, then just fading to white. All right, over here on this side of the cone, we're going to get darker. And then the darkest part is going to be not right at that edge, because there we're going to often have a little bit of reflected light. Right, I'm switching directions whenever I get to these edges for my buffer zone. And then I'm going to switch to a darker value in here. Now this is obviously really narrow, so to fit everything in, I'm not necessarily going to be able to fit everything into this little tiny area. So I'll go up as far as I can. That shadow is getting a little bit skinnier. So notice as I'm switching directions with the buffer zone, I'm also then using that as an opportunity to then use these curving marks. At a certain point, I'm just going to run out of room. So, and again, these side-to-side curving marks are going to help me create that soft edge going into that highlighted area. Right, and I'm going to also create that curving mark from this side until I just kind of run out of space here. So notice I'm just going back and forth. right? So touching things up. Coming back in with my blender. So being really careful with these edges and making sure that I don't close up all the white space. And even as I'm blending, I'm going back and forth, because if I'm dragging that shadow with me with the blending tool, then I want to make sure that it's helping with those marks, helping with the form. And there is such a thing as over blending. So if you take all of the texture out, then a lot of times it actually really takes away from the piece. So I tend to blend, but then go back and add a little bit of texture back in, a little bit of toothiness, a little bit of those directional marks. So it could be with the pencil, could be with the eraser, could be with both. Just have to try it and see. And if you don't like it, if the pencil doesn't work, you can go in and erase a little. If you don't like what's happening with the eraser, go back in with the pencil until you've got what you want. So here I'm kind of seeing this pop out a little more than I want, so I'm going to go in probably with more of a mid-tone pencil to help me make sure that this does not feel like it's just kind of a line floating in here, but feels like a shadow. And by the way, these lines, so agreeing with the form, they would go like so, and then they would actually try to, kind of change direction, so think sort of like orthogonal lines, but coming from that point. Those would be the contour lines. Okay. And so it might be a little bit dark, so again, I can just go in and lighten things up if I need to. And we did decide we were going to make this part at the top dark, so we might have to make some decisions with that. So I'm starting along here with my pencil, ebony pencil. So really, really small marks, getting right up to this edge. And I don't have to press hard, so sometimes if you're only using one pencil and you're pressing really, 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 really super hard to get the darker marks, it can create this like weird textural area where it just sticks out no matter what you do. So yeah, so I want it dark, but I'm using my ebony so that I don't have to press super, super hard. I can just kind of make that happen pretty easily. All right, so I'm getting up to my figure here, so I'm going to need to decide what I want to do. I think I'm going to make it darker than the figure. And maybe it would have been more efficient to do this part first, when it might have saved me a little bit of time shading the cylinder, or sorry, shading the cone. So I want to make sure that I have some contrast, so I could use like a little bit almost like of a white line there, as if the light is kind of catching that a little bit. Or I could, I'm afraid though that might kind of warp the shape of my cone a little bit. So another thing that I can do there is just go in with my eraser and just make sure that it's a little bit lighter. And then if I do have that white line, then I can get right up there. I'm actually changing to my HB because the tip of the pencil is a little bit narrower. So I'm just trying things out, seeing what works best. So yeah, so as I'm making that lighter, and then I might say, okay, well, wait a minute, then that highlight needs to be even lighter just to show the difference. And then I can, again, using my little like stippling technique here with my eraser. So a little stippling or hatching, and I can just go back and forth until it looks the way I want it. So a little bit of pencil, a little bit of eraser, until I kind of find that right balance. So, and I can then switch to my graphite stick. And so notice how I made this a large enough area that I can go right over it with my graphite stick without being worried about going over that edge of the table. So that's the key. In order to blend them, you have to overlap them. So blending, in this case, not having to do with the blending tool, just having to do with overlapping. So more often than not, that is how you're achieving that. I'm going to get rid of my little spotlight or sun or whatever that I just used to remind myself where that is coming from. And sometimes when you do this, that overlapping on the first pass, you might think, oh, okay, I did enough with the pencil. And then you may realize, oh, okay, no, I've actually got to go back and add a little more pencil. So that's where that revision comes in, and leaving yourself enough time to revise is really important. All right, so over here, again, I'm going to go ahead and let this be dark, and I still have contrast with the edge because I created that reflected light. And so it's not an issue. So I sort of had two lines here still. I need to make the decision about which one was right. So I need to make sure that it's lining up with my table there. All right, this video is getting pretty long, Probably going to run out of space soon on my computer. So this part, you kind of know where I'm going with this, because I did this background part before. So similar to what I'll do here. And I am noticing I'm getting sort of this like weird shadow around this. So I am going to need to make sure that that doesn't look too odd. I'm probably going to be going over some of this area and making sure that this kind of fades out more gradually, doesn't have kind of this weird shape of a shadow there. So I just need to make sure I use my gradations here. So overlapping, doing what I need to do to make sure that that transitions smoothly. So same thing over here. And probably going in here, this is a little bit rough in here, so as needed, going in here and making sure I clean this up, making sure that this looks like a smooth transition as it's coming back down to the ground here. All right, I'm going to take a break from this and do the spheres on the next video.